on the Facebook with WSGW Radio, Farm Service 790 Radio Facebook, and also 94.5 The Moose Facebook. So for those of you that would like to see our guests' comments again as we go through our broadcast, you can do that later on by going right back to those Facebooks and viewing it. Or, Jody, we do have we will have the presentation up on the miwheat.org as well, won't we?
Yes, we will. And I can kind of give you a quick run through. Terry, should I get started and kind of show folks how to do some of that?
Yes, please, go right ahead.
All righty. Well, I'm very excited to be here this morning. And we were all talking, I think, before many of you joined us, of what an awesome webinar series this has been. And for us, how much fun it's been to hear the different content, to get the different information. And I feel like I've heard from a lot of you, even though we're not face to face, and appreciate all the feedback and comments. And one of the questions I've received is, where is more of this information? How can we learn more? How can we get some updates? So I want to make sure that I show you guys really quickly. It is so easy. There's two different ways that you can find the information. And one of those is through our YouTube channel. So if you go ahead and you just Google Michigan Wheat YouTube, you will get a screen that looks just like this. So if you want to know every time Dennis and Ricardo have new videos to put up, you can hit here and you can subscribe, or you can go right here and look, there's last week's video. We also have the previous week's. Here's the marketing session. All this stuff is here. It is all on our YouTube channel. We have hours and hours of viewing, many, many different videos that are up here. You can go ahead, take a look. If you have questions, oh, look, here's talking about precision planting. We're going to talk about the wheat canopy. Here's some videos from the field day. All that information is out there. So Terry, I just want to make sure folks know, just because we're not bringing you a webinar every week, this stuff is back there that you can go and get. We never take it off, and it's all there. It's great for viewing. And when you have a bad weather day, grab a cup of coffee or hot cocoa and sit down and watch a quick wheat video and update your wheat information.
Let's talk while I have you right now, Jody, on the checkoff. Let's get a little bit more information on that.
So our checkoff votes, from what I'm hearing from growers, your ballots are arriving this week. So when you get that ballot, we want to make sure that you follow those directions. And I know I keep saying that, but every year there are ballots that are voided because either you didn't click what year you were voting, you didn't sign it, or it was not postmarked by April 2nd. So it's that easy. You get to vote production in any one of the past 3 years. So go back, check those records, look at those production, what's your best year, and then you just simply vote yes, or you vote no, and just make sure it's postmarked by April 2nd. And then we sit and wait to see what happened with the vote.
Had some questions about the annual reports. Can you enlighten us on that, Jody?
I can, and I'm going to share my screen again really quickly. Another resource that I just want to make sure that growers know are out there is the website. And we've really tried to make the website usable and workable for growers. If you're a grower, miwheat.org. That will take you right to the website. And this bar right here, this great big bold bar, this is all information for farmers. The stuff up here, this is for other people. This is for elevators doing the checkoffs. This is for media. This is for researchers. This right here, though, is what the growers are going to want to focus on. And if you go to About, you can look up anything about the organization, your board members, the legislation. We have information about the last referendum vote, and we have all the annual reports on the side. And then all of the new information, including the newest annual report, they are all over here in this box called What's Hot. So whenever you ask what's going on or what do I need to look at, go right here to this what's hot box. And that's the newer stuff. That's the most recent annual report. And you can see right here, you can look at the annual report. The way our fiscal year falls, it always looks like we're a year behind. But there's the annual report. There's that information. If you are looking for our newest publications, our Michigan Wheat 101, that is right here. So you just click here. This each grower will receive in their mailbox, but right now it's at the printer. So right now you can come and get this copy, but this 36-page document is brand new, really put together by Dennis and myself, with a lot of content by Dennis and the researchers at Michigan State. And this is basically set up to be, if you look at the table of contents, this is how to grow wheat in the state of Michigan. And we are working on this still with our web designer so that we can get the click-throughs and you can click around and you can search. But if you want to grow wheat in Michigan, this is what you need to know. And then it's broken up by section. So you can cruise right on through and get all the different information that you need to be able to grow wheat. So every wheat grower that we have will be getting a copy of this in their mailbox. I believe they should arrive next week. So this is, in addition to the webinars, this is what has been keeping Dennis and I pretty busy.
Now, do each and every one of our wheat growers get an e-newsletter?
You know, Terry, they can if they would like to. Our e-newsletters are very, very full, I would say packed full of information. So let's kind of give them a quick, if you would like to see past issues, those are really easy to get to. Those you just go to our newsroom and you can click through to the newsroom and Wheat Wisdom. And we have been doing this for years. Here's all of our last Wheat Wisdom issues. And these are really developed to be what a grower would need to know. So when it hits your inbox, it's going to look just like this. And this is what you want to look at. This is really your table of contents. Look through here, read through here. What is the information that you want to see? And then here was our article about the Michigan Wheat 101. You just click and it takes you to that article. So this is meant for you to look at it 5 seconds or less. If there's nothing you want, hit delete, you're done. If there's something you want, you can go and check out the article. So just go to the bottom of the website, put in your name and email address if you don't get it, and you will be subscribed. Right now, we go out to over 2,000 every month. And if there is a crop issue, a pest issue, something like that, I work with Dennis and we get something out right away that says, hey, this is what you need to know. So lots of good information, I think, there for growers. I just want to make sure they know what they have.
And finally, let's chit chat real briefly about the board. What's the latest going on there?
So board of directors, we are right now in the middle of getting nominees for the next year. That information will go to the governor's office and those appointments will be made usually May or June. So we'll have some new board members coming up because our original board going on 10 years has been term limited out. So we're having some changeover. So lots of good stuff going on, Terry. Lots of ways for growers to get involved.
Boy, I guess so. Jody, thank you very much. We'll probably be talking to you again a little bit later in our presentation. And I know you won't be going very far. Dennis Pennington, it's been a busy week for you. It's going to get busier. And again, for a lot of us, when we were talking before we started the program, it looks as though a big warm-up is due for us here as we roll into the weekend and into next week. Producers, for the most part, just hang tight, or what are you recommending right now?
There's a lot of people putting nitrogen on right now. I've seen a lot of sprayers out in the field putting 28 on, as well as the bin spreader spreading urea. So yeah, there's a lot of it going on right now. But yep.
And in the not too distant future here, you're going to be talking about putting a cover in there too as well. So that's topic for another conversation. And then we'll get a little plug in for you too. Okay. Next week, you're going to be talking about a lot of that, right?
Yes.
But today, we have a really special guest. Dennis, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Mr. Wheat Pete, I love you dearly. We're gonna watch every beat of what you're up to, because we know you got a lot of information coming up. Dennis, please introduce our guest today.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. Appreciate that very much. And thanks for the information up front, Jody, on the wheat checkoff program, because honestly, without the checkoff program, we wouldn't be able to put on these webinars and do all the research that we're doing right now. But it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Peter Johnson from Ontario. He's a retired cereal specialist with OMAFRA, Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Did I get that right?
Yeah, way to go, Dennis.
I'm learning, you know. It takes a while. The OMAFRA, that's a good acronym it takes a while for me to remember that. But Pete has got a lot of experience with wheat, and he's been an advocate for wheat in their crop rotation for many, many years. He now works with Real Agriculture radio show in Ontario, just promoting all aspects of agriculture. He talks about a little bit of everything, anything you can imagine. He's probably had a radio show about it. So always exciting to hear you talk, Peter. So welcome, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dennis. And we'll just share my screen here. Where did it go? There it is. And with that, we should be good to go. Is that looking like you can see my screen, Dennis?
You bet. Looks great.
Okay, perfect. What happened there? Sorry. Something went wrong. There we go. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And we're going to talk fine-tuning wheat. And as everyone knows, I live on feedback. So please, my contact information is on the screen. If you think of something after we're done here, I mean, you can always ask Dennis. Dennis is an amazing resource, but don't be afraid to email me, text me, tweet me. I love Twitter. We had a great conversation last evening about seeding early, ultra early seeding spring wheat in Alberta. And oh my gosh, the naysayers, it's just cruel. But certainly lots of fun from that perspective. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions at all. So we'll go. My shameless 1 minute of self-promotion. As Dennis said, I do work with a company called Real Agriculture. I wear many hats. I'm part of the Ontario compaction team. I'm the environmental advocate for the drainage contractors. So lots of different things. But I do a podcast on Real Agriculture called Wheat Pete's Word. And you can go to the website. It's every Wednesday. We do that update. I'm going to have to fit that update in today somehow. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to get that done. There's just so much going on, but we'll get there. And that's one thing you can listen to. We're on the Sirius satellite radio. But the other thing that I just want to throw out there is on that website, we have almost 1,500 short videos, informational videos on everything. You want to know something about corn? Man, we've got corn school. We've got soybean school. You're a dry bean grower. We call it edible bean school. For the West, we've got canola and pulse schools, but there's just a tremendous amount of information there. And so feel free to have a look at that. It's really, really cool. So the new soil school also has some really great soil health information. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to start here. And just so that everyone knows, this is totally unsolicited by Jody, Dennis, or Dave, or any of the people from the Michigan Wheat program. But man, you are in the middle of a referendum. And whatever you do, like this referendum, when Dennis explained it to me, it's like, are you kidding me? You have to have over 50% of the growers, percent of the acres. Like it's not a simple thing to get to. So, you know, from that perspective, I want to say, make sure you vote, fill out that card and vote. But I don't want you just to vote. And this is totally self-serving. This is serving Wheat Pete because I can't tell you how wonderful, how awesome it has been to work with the people in Michigan since you put the Wheat Commission, the Wheat program into place, since you funded that, because I'm actually running scared. It used to be that I was sort of a lone wolf. Oh, Martin Agerkirk was out there doing what he could for Michigan wheat, but he was stretched many different directions and struggled to find funding. And I was the guy in Ontario that was sort of doing it. Now, with Dennis and Manny and the team that you have together there at Michigan, and they have dollars to do something, us guys in Ontario are pretty much almost running scared because you guys are going to pass us. And so if you don't vote yes, man, I don't get it, because it is just an awesome program, and the amount of research and extension materials that are being generated out of that program just blows my mind. So I'll stop there, but it's totally self-serving because I want that research, right? Even though it's not in Ontario, I want that research. So please vote yes, keep this thing going. Enough on that. So let's talk wheat. And last week you heard about these yield enhancement networks. And what's really cool is that we have one in Prince Edward Island. That's way out on the east coast of Canada. It's been running, this is its third year. And we started a pilot one last year in Ontario. And Dennis is going to talk more about the Michigan one next week, I think. But I love these yens. And I love them because all of a sudden, as Pete Barry said last week, it used to be that you as the grower would come to me and say, okay, Johnson, like with a Twitter handle like Wheat Pete, you got to be the expert. And so if you're the expert, tell me how to do this. Well, come on, I'm not on your farm, and everything's a little, like, there's so many differences. The beauty here is that now you're doing the best you can, and the researcher comes to you and says, let's take some measurements. Let's see what you're doing that the next grower's not doing, and let's learn from that so that everybody can move forward. And it's such a cool process, and it's a reversal of the roles, and it's really phenomenal. So what have we learned so far? And when you look at this yen network in the UK, just quite amazing how there's three things that really jump out. And certainly Pete Barry talked about this, but it's the attention to detail. The other thing it is, and we aren't likely ever going to get to this in Michigan or in Ohio or in Ontario to the same level, because our growing season is simply that much shorter, but small multiple doses. And the other thing that they talk about is never letting that crop slow down. And they look at theoretical yield potential. And did you know that the barley yen winner last year in the UK, all the researchers looked at his theoretical yield potential. I forget they said what it was, but he got 102% of his theoretical yield potential. So clearly he knows something that even the researchers do, and they have to go back to the table and figure out where they're slipping the clutch. And that's just phenomenal. But the thing that I really want to drive home about this, not only the small multiple doses that, really getting out and looking at that wheat crop, man, 24%. Pete Barry said this last week, 24% comes down to the grower. So you give the same weather, the same inputs, and 24% of the final yield is whether you're Dennis Pennington or you're Peter Johnson. And Dennis Pennington is going to get 24% more yield because he's a way better grower than Peter Johnson is. And I finally understand why it is that my neighbors always get higher yields than I do, because, man, I'm not as good a grower. So I want to put that in. Look at a Formula One race car. 18,000 RPMs is what that motor turns over at. She goes from 0 to 62 miles per hour in under 2 seconds. Top speeds well over 200 miles an hour, 1,000 horsepower under the hood in some cases. And guess what? Formula One race cars, it's 70% the car and it's 30% the driver. So it's just like your wheat crop. Your wheat crop is that Formula One race car. It's got all that power under the hood, just chewing away, chomping at the bit. It's up to you as the grower to release that and really figure out how to make that go. So on that note, how good can it get? And I love this. I got to interview Eric Watson is the grower on the left-hand side of your screen. And I got to interview Eric Watson for the Ontario Ag Conference last year. And the chap on the right-hand side is David Weith, and he's the main agronomist for Eric. And Eric he broke his own world record, set a new world record, 258.8 bushels per acre. Talk about that Formula One race car. Wow, I can't get 250 bushel of corn, crikey, let alone wheat. And don't forget that last week, Pete Berry said that the yield potential in Michigan, or Ontario's going to be the same, is almost the same as in the UK. And the UK and New Zealand fight for the highest possible wheat yield. So think about that. Like 230 bushel yield potential is sort of what Pete said, I think. Unbelievable. So what does it look like? And this is a tweet from David Weith, the agronomist. And what I really want you to look at in this particular picture is look at how uniform that crop is. It's thick, it's beautiful, it's uniform. And another agronomist in New Zealand that I talk to quite frequently says that a world record crop, if it's going to actually be able to take us to the new world record, I can take my iPhone 6. He runs an iPhone 6. I don't. I'm still on a BlackBerry. Oh yeah, don't talk about that. But take his iPhone 6, and there's so many wheat heads, and the stems are strong enough that he can take his iPhone 6 and set it on top of that wheat stand, and it will hold it up. And you can look at that crop and just say, wow. But it really is the uniformity. And we simply don't see that here in Ontario or in Michigan. I'm there enough. We just don't see that. And if you look at it close up, look at the fertility in the head, and look how there's no tillers lower in the canopy. So this issue of uniformity is really, really incredibly critical. And we learned about uniformity in the corn crop over the last few years, but we have not talked about uniformity in the wheat crop. And certainly, I think Dennis will talk a little bit about it next week. He and Manny Singh are doing some awesome research around that. But uniformity and then fertility in the head, man. Look at the fertility in the head. And this is another thing that we have not focused on strongly enough, is that fertility in the head. And so when you get there, you know, you kind of say, we got to remember always, we're going to try to rev up that Formula One race car. So it really does come down to those 4 yield components. The number of heads per square meter or per square foot, doesn't matter. The number of spikelets. So we always want to make sure we have enough spikelets, but that rarely limits yield from my experience in Ontario or in Michigan. We almost always end up with a big enough head. What's cool about wheat, and don't forget this, is that it's the number of florets that, or pardon me, the number of grains rather you get at each floret or each spikelet. And so on that world record wheat, they are getting 7 and 8 kernels at each one of those little florets, because you can, as Pete Berry said, get up to 9. We're typically on a good wheat crop, we might have 4 in the middle of the head. And oftentimes we're more like 2 or 3. And at the ends of the head, we might only be at 1. So there's a long way that we can go there. That fertility in the head is critical. And then the weight of each grain. And that comes back through the grain fill process. So we go back and look at this world record crop, that uniformity. But the thing that jumps out at me, and another thing that I don't think we've done a good enough job on, is there's 1,260 heads per square meter. That's 117 heads per square foot. And right now, if Phil Needham is listening, he's rolling his eyes. He's saying, Johnson, you don't go there, because that wheat in Michigan it's going to go flat, and we're just not going to have a good wheat crop because it's going to lodge. But it's really interesting, 117 heads per square foot. And he's only doing that on 130 seeds per square meter, or about 11 seeds or 12 seeds per square foot. 10 tillers per plant. That is the target, 10 tillers per plant. And that's what they had in the wheat that broke the world record. And so you kind of go, well, that's just got to be a New Zealand thing, because that can't work. Well, I mentioned that we have this yen, a pilot of the yen last year run by Agris Co-op. And when we look at the data, and this is the data, my yield is the yellow line, my heads per square foot are the green line. And out of all the measurements that Dale Cowan and the people at Agris Co-op took, the one thing that really correlated to the yield was the number of heads per square foot. And if you notice that green line, heads per square foot, we are dabbling with 100 heads per square foot. Not all of the fields, but certainly, 100 heads per square foot. We're in the game of Eric Watson and 112 heads per square foot. And so it really has made me rethink how we might get to these ultra high yields, and the fact that we have to pay a bit more attention to how many heads per square foot we actually have going through that thought process. The other interesting thing is, I'm a big nitrogen guy, and you know that if you've ever listened to me talk. I am a big nitrogen guy. And when we look at the nitrogen, man, the nitrogen is not correlated to yield at all. We have the highest yield down here with a grower that put on 120 pounds of nitrogen, a grower out here that put on 180 pounds of nitrogen, and his yield is just under 100 bushels per acre. Now, do not tweet out that Wheat Pete says you don't need nitrogen to make wheat yield, because you do need nitrogen. But it's really interesting how the background, the rotation, the whole bunch of other things like manure supplying capacity or the organic matter in the soil, like there's so many impacts on the nitrogen rate that, at least in this pilot study with 24 growers, there was almost no correlation between yield level and nitrogen rate. And that is a really interesting outcome. So we kind of start here. We're ready to grow great wheat. And if we grow great wheat, we're going to make the bins burst. I hope that never happens to you. But how do we get there? So I really want to start a little bit on tillering. And this is some great work done by Kurt Steinke at Michigan State. We're into the spring right now. You're trying to predict, when should you put nitrogen on? Dennis said you're already out there putting nitrogen on. Well, okay, is it too early? Do we put it all on in one shot? How much do we put on? Well, you really do have to come back to this whole tiller count. And the one thing in this particular study that Kurt did, it's different seeding dates. And so on September the 17th, when he seeded, 4 tillers per plant. So that's 5 heads, the main head and 4 tillers, 5 heads per plant. October 11th, he got almost 2 tillers, and so that would be 3 heads per plant. October the 28th, no tillers, so that's 1 head per plant. If I want to get to that 70 heads per square foot, which is sort of what we've talked about before, or 700 heads per square yard, something like that, then I need different number of plants in September than I do in October. And by the way, if you want to ramp up that number of heads, immediately everybody is saying, well, Johnson wants more heads. I'm going to seed more seeds. Man, the answer is no. If you seed more seeds, I'm sorry, did I lose my connection there?
Yeah, I think it did. It started to bungle up on us here. So go ahead and reshare your
Okay.
screen.
Yeah, sorry about that. Generally, it hasn't been an issue. Are we back now?
It's coming up. Yeah, there you go. You're good.
And so where did I bungle up there, Dennis, just so I know where to start from?
You talked about the number of seeds that you plant in September versus October is different depending on how to reach your target of
Yeah,
the 700
absolutely.
per square yard.
Yep, no, good. So the one thing though, like we've tried in terms of that seeding rate data to up our seeding rate. And in September, if I up my seeding rate, I don't get more yield. You should get more heads, but I don't. I actually get less yield. And so this comes back to the Eric Watson concept about maybe we need to space those plants a little bit better. And maybe I need to target bigger plants with better tillers. But you would say that down here at October 28th, why don't I just seed enough to get 700 heads per square foot? You know, we'll put that seeding rate up to 3 million seeds per acre. Yeah, you know, the problem is that the crop still is going to tiller. And when it tillers, we end up with crops like this. So this is that late planted wheat. And with that late planted wheat, my main heads, you would look at those main heads and say, gosh, that's pretty decent. And then you compare them to my first tiller, that gets made right now on that later planted wheat. And you'd say, it's not that much behind these. But if you actually look at the fertility in the head, you can see that there's a massive difference in that fertility in the head. And in actual fact, it's less than 50% yield. And when we get to those late tillers, then there's very little yield. And so this uniformity comes back into play. And the only way to get uniformity is to seed early and have those tillers in the fall, because when we get those fall tillers, then all of a sudden I have tiller heads that are essentially the same size as the main head, as opposed to these tiller heads that I need them to make the yield, but man, they just aren't bringing enough to the table. So I'm just going to walk through this a little bit more. And these are two fields from last year, one planted September the 10th on the right, one planted November the 10th on the left. And what about nitrogen management on these two fields? How is that different? What about how do I make those decisions? You're outputting that nitrogen on right now. And so the next couple of slides, it's always September 10th on the right, November 10th on the left. And when you look at that, you say, well, you know, that November 10th stand, that is a pretty nice stand for the 10th of November, seeded in Ontario, similar to 10th of November in Michigan. It's a pretty decent stand. But when you compare it to the September wheat, oh my gosh, totally different. You can see a whole bunch of excellent tillers coming off each of those plants. And you kind of get to that and you say, let's dig them out, and we pull them out and you start looking at the difference. The November wheat, that picture was taken in May, I think, or late April. I just forget exactly, but you can see that we got the main stem. We got a couple of weak little tillers there. And that's why that late wheat always struggles, because those tillers will be later in maturity and they're not going to make as big a head. Whereas over here, we have nice big tillers that are really kind of going to be able to make, they made in the fall, they'll have those big heads. And so the management becomes different, and the yield potential also is significantly different. And so when you're trying to make that decision, what are you looking for? And so what you're going to have to do, if you're out there and you're trying to decide, how hard do I push? Do I put all my nitrogen on now just to get it out of the way? And the answer is, you're looking for viable stems or good heads. And so you have to dig those plants up and do tiller counts. And so this is a typical plant. You can see that that main stem has 5 leaves. And we have the first tiller here coming off the coleoptile, the second tiller here, and the third tiller here. And then the real question becomes, well, I'm counting tillers on that plant. How do I count those tillers? And you would say, well, that's the main head, 1 head, 2 head, 3 head, so 4 heads in total. But that tiller right there is not nearly as advanced. And if you have a good stand, that tiller right there, tiller 3, is actually not likely going to make a head. And so you know that you've got a good strong tiller if it has 3 leaves. So if it has 3 leaves, you count that tiller. If it has 2 leaves, some people would say don't count it at all. Well, man, I get into enough fields where I just think you can't give up on those tillers. And so I sort of look at those tillers with 2 leaves and say, I'm still counting them are about 80% of a tiller. So, or of a head, because most of them will make it, the odd one won't. So 1 head, 0.8, 0.8. So that is about 2.5 good stems on that particular plant. And by the way, I have been really scouting wheat in the last few days, and the variability in tiller count in the same row, I will dig plants up that have 5 strong tillers, and the plant right beside it has 2 tillers. And this comes back to this uniformity, and we're just not getting uniformity in that stand. And so one of those things we have to get way better. And so when you're in that 70 viable stems per square foot, something like that, 700 stems per square yard, that's the sweet spot. And that's when you don't need to push nitrogen. If you're out there putting nitrogen on that wheat right now, it's okay, as long as you don't get any loss. But man, if you get loss, then, and we'll show you that, if you get loss, then all of a sudden putting all your nitrogen on right now is 100% the wrong strategy. And then there's a whole bunch of things wrong with putting all your nitrogen on right now, a lodging thing, all those kinds of impacts. So this uniformity, again, I just hate this. This is a grower that I work with, and you can see here we have the plants coming up last fall. We've got a big bunch of seeds here, and we know that if those seeds are closer than about 4/10 of an inch, then there's too much plant-to-plant competition. They're never going to yield like you want them to yield. And you look at that stand, and immediately you say, oh, I mean, it's a decent stand, but it's just not going to be a record-breaking stand. It's just not uniform enough. And this comes down to this seed depth. And so I dug some of those plants up. We have seeds at 1 inch. We have seeds at over 2 inches. We have seeds that haven't emerged yet. We have little guys coming up over here that must be deeper than 2 inches. We just have to get better. We are using 1950s technology, and it is the year 2000, like 2021 rather. Like, how can we use 1950s technology and think that we're doing a good job? Drives me nuts. Okay, so we're about here. We need a whole lot of guys to come to the table and help us get the job done. We're not quite there. So one of the things that for sure you have to remember is that grain fill is really critical. And why does corn get 200 bushel and wheat get 100 bushel? It's because corn gets a 60-day grain fill period, and wheat gets, in Ontario, in Michigan, on average about a 34-day grain fill period. And so we're done with seeding. We're moving into the grain fill period. Now, how do we manage that crop to get more yield? Because remember, each one of those florets can have 1 seed, can have 2 seeds. If you're Eric Watson, it can have 7 seeds, right? 7 seeds. So how do we get that crop to have more seeds at every floret? We can't do anything about our stand now. We can't do anything about the uniformity. How can we get more seeds per floret? And so you gain 4 bushels per acre for every extra day of grain fill. And so if somehow we can get that crop to have an extra day of grain fill, we can get an extra 4 bushels. And this comes down to, when does it head? And I've shown you this before, and Dennis had a great write-up on this in the performance trials. But wheat is a cool season crop. And anytime it goes over about 85 degrees Fahrenheit, that wheat crop is not doing very well. And if it gets up over 90 degrees, it actually is not making yield at all to speak of. Certainly if it goes over 100 Fahrenheit, it almost just shuts down. But a perfect day in wheat plant's life is a 50-degree night and a 65-degree day. That's a perfect day. If you could keep those temperatures all the way through grain fill, you lengthen that grain fill period out and you get more yield. And the only way to do that is to have that wheat head out earlier. And so we can't do anything about this now, but it makes sense when you start looking at picking wheat varieties. Oftentimes, the wheat varieties that are shorter season, with corn, go long season. With soybeans, go long season. The wheat varieties that tend to head out a little bit later and mature a little bit later are often not the highest yielding varieties. It's not perfect relationship, but the earlier heading ones tend to be the higher yielding because they start that grain fill in a cooler period of the year. And so we really want to drive that process earlier. And it's also why planting earlier makes more difference. So let's talk a minute about corn. What is the number one factor driving corn yields higher? And a lot of people will say genetics and like better agronomy and a whole bunch of things. In actual fact, the number one thing driving corn yields higher over the last 30 years is stay green. If you think about it, 30 years ago when you harvested your corn crop, that corn crop was dead from bottom to top. The plant was dead. In fact, it often died long before the grain was dry enough to combine. Nowadays, you go to the field, that stalk is sopping wet. Stay green is what is adding yield. But what can we do from that standpoint in the wheat crop? And this gets back to how do we make that more kernels at every floret? So what we want now, because all too often in a wheat field, we have green heads and dead leaves. And if you have that, I will guarantee you that you have lost yield because you have to be the corn crop. You have to have that stay green. And so this particular wheat crop is a grower here in Ontario. And what did he do? He took this to heart. He took it way beyond what I expected, but he said, okay, if I want that, I want to have dry heads. That grain is about 20% moisture, dry heads and green leaves. So mature heads and green leaves. He did that. That's what it looked like at harvest. Man, it is tough to combine, but look at that yield monitor, 240 bushels per acre in the high yielding zones. What's the world record wheat crop? 258.8. And Pete Berry said we have the yield potential to get there. That was a calibrated yield monitor. Now that was the good area of the field, the sandier, siltier area of the field, but still that is rivaling those world record yields. And the field average was 154 bushels per acre. 2 fusarium fungicides to keep that plant green through grain fill. A second late, that's the second fusarium fungicide was late so that we got the green canopy. That field 154 bushels. The other fields in the area were running from 95 to 110 bushels per acre. Now, I don't expect you'll always see that difference, but this stay green factor really is quite important. And just to prove that point, I mean, we now have some different products on the market for that stay green opportunity or for the fusarium timing, I should say. And what I really want you to look at is the right-hand column, that NDVI, and you can see that Miravis Ace, an excellent fungicide, but not statistically different in yield. It's better in yield numerically, but not better than Carumba or Prosero. And oftentimes you might not see a big difference in yield, but when you look at that NDVI, man, the stay green capability, that that particular product has can definitely bring more to the table. And I don't work for Syngenta. This is third-party data, but boy, I'm really excited about the potential of more stay green in the crop. And you gain up to 3 bushels per acre per day. Pete Berry said this last week as well, but that's what we found for every day that plant stays green during grain fill. All right, we're about here. And where are we at? By the way, this just, I'll stop here for just a second. This drives me nuts because we have lived off wheat for 10,000 years. And yet people tell us that it's not good for us. It just like, that just drives me crazy. All right, nitrogen fungicide interaction. You're at the time now. How are we getting there? Well, we clearly have seen, and I've talked about this lots. Oh yes, but before I go there, the nitrogen fungicide interaction, it's a 1-2 hit. So we really do have nitrogen and fungicide have to go hand in hand. They work together. And I'm not going to talk more about the synergy. You can ask me about that if you want to after, but man, don't put more nitrogen on the crop if you're not going to use a fungicide. That fails. We've proven that time and time again. The value of a fungicide, it's real, but it'll be pretty much break even unless you add more nitrogen. The two really do have to work hand in hand. And so that nitrogen fungicide interaction. But last week, this question I understand came up, and I always have this slide in my presentation anyway, but the fungicide never, ever is tank mixed with the nitrogen. They are 2 separate applications. In our experience, if you tank mix the fungicide with the nitrogen, all too often you get significant leaf burn. And what happens when you get that significant leaf burn is that you've just taken all the value of the fungicide away. You burnt the leaf tissue the fungicide was going on to. Normally you'd expect some yield boost out of that fungicide. No, you put the two together and you might as well not to put the fungicide in because you give up that benefit. So just do not do this. If you tank mix the two together, in my estimation, you're simply not a real wheat grower. Don't do it. And here's the data. I'm not going to spend long here. I've shown you this many times, but when we do the nitrogen and fungicide together, that is the yellow line, and we change the shape of the curve. We need more nitrogen, we get higher yields, and we get those higher yields because we've kept the crop clean with the fungicide. We've got the stay green, we've got the photosynthetic capability. So nitrogen rates, everybody wants to know, what is the right nitrogen rate? And we're back reevaluating that. In our old data, this is I shouldn't say old, right up until last year or 2 years ago, about 60% of the time, 59% of our trials, the best rate of nitrogen was 150 pounds per acre. 30% of the time, it was 120 pounds per acre. And 10% of the time, it was 90 pounds per acre. Now, in those trials, we didn't go above 150 pounds per acre most of the time. And I'm astounded how Ontario growers are really starting to manage wheat and wanting to push wheat. And so now, we have plant growth regulators, you do as well. And we're really starting to say, can we push above 150 pounds of nitrogen? Is there more yield potential there if we keep it standing? This is one of the growers that I consult with. We did a trial there. His standard rate was 120 pounds of nitrogen. He said to me, can we push that? I said, on field of wheat, I think we can. So we just did a simple trial. We pumped it up to 180. We added the growth regulator to keep it standing. And there was an additional 12 bushels per acre there. And that was last year when we had 30 days where the temperature went over 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and we jammed that grain fill period way shorter than it ever should have been. And I think had we had cooler temperatures through grain fill, that we would have gotten much higher yields out of that added nitrogen and growth regulator than just 12 bushels per acre. But maybe I'm wrong. It's just a really interesting thought process. So nitrogen timing, You know, Dennis is saying that there's lots of people out there putting nitrogen on. Well, if you're on that November 10th wheat, you need to be out there putting some nitrogen on. You have to stimulate some tillers. You have to support all the tillers. But if you're out there on the September the 10th wheat and you're pounding on a whole bunch of nitrogen just to get it done on the frost and get it out of the way, that's called flat wheat, because there's so much growth there. There's already too much growth there. And that September the 10th wheat, you really want to start holding off. So on average, and I could show you data from all over, but on average, the best timing, the best program almost always is a split nitrogen application. We don't always get yield from that. You'll see that in a minute. But on average, it's where we put the first shot on at green up, and we come back at stem elongation, and that's where we put that second nitrogen application on. If you put it all on at planting, or in this case at green up or now, pretty good bet that you could be leaving some yield on the table, and lodging becomes the other big issue. And here's the real challenge with going out there and putting it all on now, or all on even the 10th of April. This is 2012 Ontario data. And if you remember 2012, it's like this year, where we had a really warm March. It was 75 degrees Fahrenheit on the 20th of March, give or take. We had growers plant corn and soybeans on the 24th and 25th of March. And then a whole bunch of growers went out and they put all their nitrogen on their wheat crop, because that's, you know, normal. And even our normal timing on the split was, we put the first shot on because it greened up in March. We put it on then. We came back just about the 25th of April and put the second application on, because it was getting to about growth stage Feeks 6. It was just starting to get there. And all of a sudden we got 2 weeks where it showered every day. It just kept raining, and not heavy rains. We didn't get flooded, but just showers and showers, and the soil temperatures were really warm. And under those conditions, you can lose 5% of your nitrogen per day. And that particular year, because we did it all early, when we came back and we put it on after that warm, wet period in May, that's when we got the most yield. So sometimes those late splits really do pay off from that standpoint. So split nitrogen, if you want to be a real wheat grower, I think you want to go there. It's insurance. It doesn't always work. If you put it all on now and you never get any loss and you don't have any lodging, by the way, if you don't have any lodging, I don't think you put enough nitrogen on your wheat crop. It should almost always lean in the nitrogen overlaps. If it doesn't lean in the nitrogen overlaps, you probably left yield on the table. But if you split your nitrogen versus putting it all on at once, if you never get situation to lose any and you don't lodge the crop, then you paid for some insurance that you never collected on. It does prevent against loss, right? So it is, that's a good thing. You have better knowledge for your second application. My best growers, I always push them to do this. We put a little on early, and then with our split, we can say, what have the temperatures been like? What has the moisture been like? How's that crop growing? You can make a better decision on how much to put on the second time. It prevents lodging. Man, split nitrogen prevents lodging. That's a huge one. It's an environmental win, and as much as, you know, that might not play in your mind, it's a huge thing from that standpoint, but it doesn't always work, as I said. So typically we say 65% up front, 35 in the split. On really advanced wheat, it's probably more like a 50-50 split, something like that. But here's my aggressive nitrogen package. So if you really want to push nitrogen, and this is what my top growers are doing, and they're following the UK example of, can we actually get to multiple small applications? Well, they put on their sulfur now, but some nitrogen comes with it. So they're out there putting 75 to 100 pounds of ammonium sulfate. It's a 210024 sulfur product. And so a little bit of nitrogen right now to get that crop started. Not a lot in case there's some loss. And then At Feeks 5 to 6, they put the main shot of nitrogen on, and that's roughly 100 pounds of nitrogen. So we're at 120 pounds of nitrogen total at this point. About Feeks 9, they'll make a decision on how much more nitrogen to put on that crop. And sometimes Feeks 9 can be a little late. They're like, nothing in this world is a guarantee, but that's flag leaf stage is when they're targeting. And they're also looking at how much sulfur. So we can't miss sulfur anymore. It's a minimum 10 pounds of sulfur. I have growers that are going up to 30 pounds per acre of sulfur. I'm not sure it's needed, but on good wheat, we have seen that we need at least 20 pounds of sulfur. And then don't forget, sulfur source does make a difference. If it's not sulfate, if it's thiosulfate, if it's the liquid form, it's not all of the thiosulfate is available to the wheat crop. And so when I say 10 pounds of sulfur, that's as sulfate, and it probably takes about 15 pounds of thiosulfate to be the equivalent of 10 pounds of sulfate sulfur. With that, I'm going to stop. I hope I've generated a few questions, a few thoughts, and I hope we have a great discussion. And I hope, for goodness sakes, that I have hit the mark. And I will stop sharing my screen.
All right. Well, Peter, great job. Thank you so much. We covered a lot of topics there, and we do have some questions in the Q&A. So I'd suggest maybe we open up the Q&A box and let's start going through some questions, if that's okay with you.
100%, Dennis, and I'm ready to argue with you. It should be fun.
Yeah. And so as we do this, and as we start having this discussion back and forth, if you guys have more questions, please type them into the Q&A box, because you might be thinking about something different than what we are. So get those questions in there and we will answer them. We've got 30 minutes to answer questions. And if we have more questions than that, we'll come back after we give the credits out. And we'll keep on answering questions until we're all done. So, all right. So let's go ahead and get started. And Peter, if you want to follow along with me, you can open the Q&A box on your end.
Yeah, I got her.
All right, so let's take the first question from John. Has Canada conducted any test plots on broadcast seeding wheat versus planting through the drill? Broadcast seeding seems like seedings would have less immediate competition from seedlings being spread out.
Yeah, great question, John. I love that question. By the way, we do this thing on Real Agriculture called The Agronomists. It's every Monday night. And Phil Needham and Peter Johnson were on The Agronomists, not this past Monday, but the Monday before, talking about seeders and drills. And I asked Phil this question as well, because I'm getting the same question in Ontario. And the answer is yes. We did a bunch of trials going back, I don't know, 15 years or something like that, with a Salford air cart on top of an RTS. Okay, so a Salford RTS, and we were broadcasting the wheat seed and then letting the Salford RTS incorporate it. And you can say, well, okay, that's not perfect incorporation. And if I went out there with an Amazon Catros or a Lemken Heliodor or one of these high-speed drills, I think I'd do a better job of incorporation. But from a seedling spacing standpoint, John's 100% right. You should give each one of those seedlings should be much better spaced out and not have the plant-to-plant competition. The challenge is that I want uniformity. And when I'm out there digging right now, and Dennis, I know you have some slides as well, right? Where you dig up in the plants in the same row, and one, like the uniformity is horrible, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, go ahead, Dennis.
And so actually we are doing some of this testing as well. And I have a grower that has used that Salford RTS system, just like what you're talking about. And I talked to him just like 3 days ago, I talked to him, and he now has built his own planter. He calls it, he took 2 old John Deere systems and took all the units off, put them together. So he's planting on like 4.7 inch row spacings. But he actually is planting the wheat in the ground, and I got him to do a trial side by side with this planter and the Salford right next to it. And he said, I got to tell you, I hate to admit it, but the seeder looks better than the air cart. does.
Yeah.
Those plots do.
And so
he admitted that getting it planted in the ground, actually those plots actually do look better. But we are doing research, and we implemented some of this this last fall. We have 4 farms where we're using a little bit more intensive incorporation than that Sulfur.
right.
So we broadcast some seed on the surface, and we incorporated with like a Degelman high-speed disc and a Joker high-speed disc. So we're trying to incorporate the seed in that top, maybe down to 2 inches, or 1.5 to 2 inches. And so I don't have any data to share on that, but yeah, there's a lot of guys interested in that, because you look at the planting window we've had in the last, say, 4 planting seasons for wheat. We've had some real limitations. Last year was great. We got a lot of wheat planted on time, but the 2 years prior to that, it was rained so much you couldn't get a 3-day window to harvest beans ahead of wheat to get your wheat planted on time. So this offers a chance to get them planted. You can plant much more acres per hour using that system.
Yeah, 100%. And so, Dennis, by the way, I'm an old guy, and you say recently we've had these short windows. No, come on. It's been forever we've had short windows in the fall. You get the odd good fall, and you get then the next 4 falls are crap. And then you get an odd good fall and you think things are good. No. So in our trials, we lost about 10% in yield when we went to that Salford system compared to where we did a good job with the drill. But your point, we lose a bushel per acre per day for every day we delay seeding.
Yeah.
So if I can get it seeded by broadcasting and incorporating, and get it seeded, well, maybe 2 weeks earlier, because it rains again, then all of a sudden, what's wrong with broadcasting? And I have got growers who broadcast and do it successfully and make it work. But we give up on uniformity, because when you say 2 inches deep, if you go and look, it doesn't incorporate every seed 2 inches deep, right? Like it's a huge range, and there'll be some at a 1/4 inch and some at 1.5 inches. And
some right at the soil surface too.
Yeah, exactly. And so on clay soils, we always got more frost heave with that system. Anyway, we better move on. We don't want to spend all the time on that, right?
Yeah, for sure. All right, next question. Peter, can fall applied starter fertilizer damage seedling growth? And if so, is a good time to apply fertilizer? Is it a good time to apply fertilizer?
Yeah, so we're assuming you're talking about phosphorus, okay? And I'm the poster child, Dennis. I didn't put my phosphorus slides in because, I just thought, oh, it's been talked about enough. But so no, can you damage wheat seed in the fall? For sure you can. I mean, gosh, if you want to go out there with 250 pounds per acre of a 20, yeah, that's too much fertilizer. You're going to damage it. But really, and what is most interesting in our trials, in our studies, is that winter wheat in particular does not respond to potash. So there's no point having potash in the fall. We don't really need much nitrogen in the fall, because we don't get growth in the fall. So it comes down to phosphorus, phosphorus, phosphorus. And if you put 400 pounds per acre of MAP with your wheat seed, you're going to fry the wheat seed, but you're also going to go bankrupt. So at 100 pounds of MAP, I've never seen it damage wheat seed. And just put it with the wheat seed, 100 pounds of MAP, and life is good.
Okay, very good. Okay, next question. If one plants wheat in rotation every other year, what problems can arise? So like a short rotation.
Right. And so, what's really interesting is it depends on your soil type. All right. So if you do that on a clay soil, and some new data coming out of the Harrow Research Station, which is right down by Detroit. So, pretty similar soils to what you'd have just across the St. Clair River. Oh, gosh. You cannot do a wheat every other year rotation, because you will give up at least 10% in yield. It just doesn't work. And we get into things like Fusarium crown rot or take-all or sharp eye spot. You can get into the viral diseases, cephalosporium stripe, a bunch of those kinds of diseases. But on lighter soils, you can actually get away with it for a longer time period. At the end of the day, you're still going to be way better in a 3-crop rotation from a soil health standpoint. Like, we've got lots of data there, but on sandy loam soil, you probably can get away with that rotation at least 4 or 5 times, like 10 years before you see significant issues start to show up. But eventually the root diseases are going to get you.
Yep. All right, next question. Does your nitrogen total amount include fall applied N?
Yeah. And the answer is no, because I'm not putting any nitrogen on in the fall. I'm a MAP guy. And so if I put on 100 pounds of MAP, and that's what I do on my own farm, by the way, is 100 pounds of MAP. So that's 11 pounds of phosphorus, or pardon me, of nitrogen.
Yep.
And I lose 50% of it over the winter. Just give up. In Michigan, in Ontario, the climate we live in, whatever nitrogen you put on in the fall, you lose half of it over the winter. So it's 5 pounds, and the wheat crop used some of it in last fall. So no, I don't. But if you're putting 30 pounds on because you think you need fall nitrogen, then yes, my total nitrogen amount would include 50% of your fall nitrogen, because you're going to lose half of it, but the other half is likely there.
Okay. Next question. What time between early fungicide and early split N, and which one first?
Cool. So Dennis, you have data on this, don't you? What would your data say?
Yeah. So the time between the early fungicide and then the early split, we're seeing that the early fungicide, it doesn't always provide benefit every year. It depends on the variety, depends on the weather you have, how much disease pressure is present. It's more of a protectant, I guess. So in a year like, was it in 16 when we had stripe rust, those guys that did that early fungicide really saw a yield benefit. So in terms of economics, if you can predict the weather and predict, and know what you have out in the field and what your variety is, yeah, you can make a good decision on the early fungicide. For the most part, not a lot of guys are doing the early fungicide, except maybe in the soft white growing region in Michigan. And then the early split N, yeah, most of the guys that are putting the nitrogen on now are putting their first shot, and most of them are doing the split. And the reasons they're doing it now is because the field conditions are right, and knowing that they have a second opportunity to come back. And if we have those big April rainfalls, we can, overcome that with whatever nitrogen loss we have an opportunity to correct for that. So,
yeah. So I'll just jump into just to say, remember the early fungicide, we really want the fungicide to make that plant be photosynthesizing at maximum capacity at anthesis, at heading. You put on a fungicide really early, and it's rare that it pays. And the stripe rust example, Dennis, is one of the few times, but that was only on susceptible varieties, right? And so if you had a tolerant variety, even then that fungicide didn't pay. But in terms of how much time in between those two, I mean, if you're putting if you're looking for days, basically, because you don't want to damage the wheat crop, because I don't want you to put the two together, right? So then you should try to leave 3 days between. If you can leave 3 days between those two applications, but ask yourself why you're putting the early fungicide on, because I'm not sure it's paying.
Yeah. All right, next question. With aggressive nitrogen, any at planting or prior fall, or prior in the fall?
Yeah, and I think I've addressed that, right? The answer is no, not for me.
Yeah, I think you did address that. Okay, next question. What does lodging look like? And I'm maybe assuming this is when you're putting on like that 180 pounds of nitrogen, the picture of the field that you showed.
Oh, sorry. I guess I should have put a picture in of lodged wheat, and I just for time I took it out. That's my bad. No, lodged wheat is just when it fell over, right? And there's a whole bunch bad with lodging, and I think someone, whether it was Romulo or Phil, talked about when the wheat lodges, like you can lose a bushel per acre per day pretty easily for every day that it's lodged. So the earlier that it lodges or leans over, and it either pulls the roots out of the ground or it breaks the stem. And either way, you're losing yield. Some of the data yesterday, right, Dennis, is that once it lodges, you also get higher leaf disease levels in the crop. And so now we need more fungicide. No, so lodging, yeah.
So related to lodging, I had a consultant tell me that with his growers, he doesn't recommend a PGR unless they can hit that 140, 150 bushel yield. Would you agree with that, or do you think you need to be getting PGR on it yields a little bit lower than that?
So Dennis, it's variety, 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 and then it's planting date and seeding rate. Like when you ask me that question flat out, it's not that simple. So we have varieties that growers grow here that at 120 bushel per acre, they'll be flat as a pancake. And so on a DS752, for example, it's probably the first wheat variety we've seen that will rival 25R40 for yield potential, but it's really poor standability. And if you don't use some like split nitrogen, add a growth regulator, on the other hand, on 25R40 or 20, like some of those really Priestley, one of the hard wheats that we have that stands like trees, I've put 180 pounds of nitrogen on Priestley and not had it go flat without a growth regulator. So it really depends. But if you don't have high yield wheat, then making money out of a growth regulator is unlikely. You've got to be pushing those yield boundaries. And for some growers, that'll be 120. For some growers, that'll be 150.
Well, and I kind of asked that question to put in a shameless plug because we got some really good lodging data on one of our trials from Sanilac location last year. So if you're wondering about these varieties and the impact, go download and look at our MSU wheat performance trial report and look at the lodging data that came from the Sanilac County location, because I've got pictures, and maybe I should put that in next week's presentation, of a plot standing perfectly right next to one laying it completely flat. The management was identical. I mean, they're right side by side. So the weather was the same. You can't say that, well, this plot got wind and the other one didn't. They were right side by side. All right, so let's keep moving. What is the key to getting more kernels per spikelet?
Yeah, so plant health at anthesis, and then it's temperature and sunshine. And so really good research out of North Carolina State, where the more nitrogen I have in the spike at anthesis, the more kernels that head will set. And I've worked with that research trying to figure out how can I get more nitrogen in the spike at anthesis. So we've looked at foliar dissolved urea at flag leaf to see if we could get the leaves to take some of that nitrogen up and get more in the head at anthesis. And it has been less than stellar outcome. But that is why my aggressive growers are that last nitrogen application is at Feeks 9. We're flag leaf stage, and as long as you get a bit of moisture, we get that flush of nitrogen into the plant. So we've got maximum amount of nitrogen we can in the head at anthesis. And then we hope that we get sunny, cool conditions. And make sure disease as well. Control the disease. You don't want to have disease affecting the crop at that time frame.
So I know you mentioned in your presentation about some of those aggressive growers that are putting on that flag leaf application. That's 28% streamed on. Is that what they're doing?
So they will stream on 28. Some growers do that. Right now, the preferred method is the product called Amidus. And so it's a 40% nitrogen, 5% sulfur. And they're generally in the range of 100 pounds per acre of that. We don't have good research to support that the sulfur's doing much then, but the beauty of the Amidus is that it's a good product. It spreads nicely. It's not dusty. It's a premium price product, but you don't get into any risk of burn at that point in time, right? So stream in 28, we can do it and not burn the flag leaf, but if you do it on a really hot, windy day and you burn the flag leaf, then all bets are off, man. I'm not going there,
And we found the same thing there too, because we tried putting some nitrogen on flag leaf, and I actually used flat pan nozzles. I wanted to see how bad it could possibly be.
Dennis.
So, but no, I got great scorch data because I used a whole bunch of different products and whatnot. And so it's surprising how some of those nitrogen foliar products can be relatively safe. But when I sprayed on the 28%, it was like it burned that flag leaf right up. But we got a 7 bushel bump when we put just plain urea out there at flag leaf, and we put 30 pounds on at the flag leaf timing.
Right. And that was a dry product, Dennis, the urea? Yeah. And so that comes back to this concept of trying to get that nitrogen in the spikelet. Cool. Good for you. Awesome.
Yeah. And so, part of that more kernels per spike, that's determined pretty early in the growing season in terms of, the development or the growth of the plant. And so your early season management, the 30 days prior to anthesis is also kind of important as well. But lengthening out that grain fill period is really important. You mentioned the hot weather that we had last year. We actually took flowering data and then physiological maturity data on our variety trial at one location this year. And our average was a grain fill period of 24 days. So it was cut back significantly. We had much higher yield potential when we hit the flowering stage, and with that hot weather, it just really shot down.
Yeah, and just on that note, that Dennis, because we were the same way, we thought we were on track for record yields, but because we actually ended up with average yields, and I expected below average yields because of the heat. But if you manage it well, you still see some benefit, even under the high temperatures. You still see some benefit of those green leaves trying to do what they can. So yeah, it still works.
Yep. Well, we're still getting questions because I keep clicking on to answer these, and it keeps growing in numbers. So we better keep moving here.
Yep. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Are you concerned about burning the flag leaf with the flag leaf nitrogen application? We kind of just been talking about that.
Yeah, and the answer is yes. Don't burn the flag leaf. It's all bad.
Okay. Next question. What do you add to the 28% late application to eliminate leaf burn?
Yeah, and they should look at your data. Dennis, that'd be a good thing in your next or in one of your newsletters to talk about which products didn't burn and which didn't or did.
Yeah. And so the one thing that we did do is we did a late evening application. So our 28% UAN we applied in the heat of the day, in the middle of the day between 10 and 2, and then we did the same treatment after 7 p.m. There was, I think, a 6 bushel difference in yield, and the burn was significantly lower, and it went from, I don't remember how many points, it was like 50% less burn by doing the application in the evening as opposed to during the heat of the day.
No, absolutely. Cool. So that you got to send me that data, Dennis.
Okay.
More good data coming out of the Michigan wheat program. Just vote yes to the checkoff.
Yeah, really. All right, next question. When you apply nitrogen in season, do you use 28 that may burn or urea?
We've talked about that. Yep.
Okay. And we do have growers that we have some that put all liquid 28 on, and we have some that broadcast, dry urea granular early in the spring and then follow up with their second application as 28.
Oh, yeah.
So we have kind of a mix.
And so do we. And so, by the way, for the main nitrogen application, I will say that I prefer 28% and streamer nozzles, particularly, the chafer bars are the best. They're a little more money, but they really do the best uniform application. And no, I don't work for Phil Needham either, and Needham Ag Technologies that sells those particular bars. They simply, when you think about it, they work the best. But the reason I like the 28% for that main nitrogen application is the uniformity, because then we have perfect uniformity, and that's really quite critical for that big shot of nitrogen.
Yeah, and we've had some wind here during application. And if you're putting on dry granular, that wind can sometimes really change up your pattern, and you don't get quite the uniformity.
Yeah, huge, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, when you were talking about nitrogen rates, are you considering N that was applied in the fall as part of the starter program?
Yeah, we answered that.
Yeah, we've kind of done that one. Is there any yield data comparing wheat frost seeded with clover versus wheat without?
Yep, the clover has zero impact on the wheat yield, period. And I don't need to go any farther. Like it never gets big enough to do anything. It's like a little tiny plant in there that barely struggles to survive. So no, it doesn't fix nitrogen and give it to the wheat crop. I've had people say, well, it'll fix nitrogen and feed that nitrogen to the wheat crop. No, it doesn't get that big, and it never gets big enough to cause a yield loss.
Okay. Next question. I'm a dairy farm, so I plant wheat after corn silage. If I have high soil test phosphorus levels and got enough P for manure to grow my corn crop, will I see a yield increase from in-row P with my wheat?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, Matt, the first thing I'll say is that if you cannot make your soil be a phosphorus environmental problem, Lake Erie, the phosphorus in Lake Erie. So if you're into that high excessive kind of soil test range, then do not apply as much phosphorus as the wheat crop takes off. But even at high soil test levels, and it's soil type dependent. If I'm on a truly heavy clay and I have a 60, which is just right at the break point between high and excessive for us, seed placed phosphorus, like 25 pounds of P, so 50 pounds of MAP, we've seen yield increases still of 15 bushels per acre. And on a good silt loam, it's probably only 2 or 3 bushels per acre. So there is a difference there, but there is a yield boost. Not only is there a yield boost, you'll get better winter survival and you get better uniformity at headings, so you can do a better job with your fusarium fungicide. So unless you're really excessive, put on a little bit of starter, because I think it still brings enough to the table to be of value. But if the drill's not set up, you're one of those guys that can get away without it, and it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. And we've got data that supports that too, even the 25-pound rate, kind of the half rate. And we did see responses on fields that are, at the top of that threshold or even into the high range, still responded to the P in the furrow.
Yeah, good. That's awesome. Our data lines up.
Yeah. It also showed that the broadcast did equally as well. So,
yeah,
but that's okay.
No, that's okay. Like, not everybody's data has to be exactly the same, but phosphorus matters.
Yes, it does for sure. And that is the message.
Yep.
All right. Let's answer maybe one more question. And then what I'll do is I'll put up the information for credits. And then after we get done with that part, I'll come back and we'll keep on answering questions. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So one more question here, and then we'll go to credits. Would you recommend 2 fungicide applications before and last after head? And when would you recommend the timing of each?
Yeah. So I'm not a 3 fungicide guy in Michigan or in Ontario. I mean, 3 fungicides or more in the UK, in New Zealand, because it grows for 10 months. It's pretty rare that we have enough disease on the 1st of May to justify an early fungicide application. And you will always do a T3. The head spray for fusarium is a must. So the only other spray you have to consider is one other fungicide application. When do you do it? And I like to try to time it so that I'm about 21 days, give or take, 21 days before my head is going to emerge, because I get at least 14 days of control out of that first fungicide, and it takes some time for the disease to ramp up. And so if I can time it there, then I really get the maximum benefit. And I keep that crop green, as you said, Dennis, for that 2 weeks before anthesis, so that it's going at maximum. And then the head fungicide is for the grain fill period. And to me, those are the best timings.
So I wonder if he was maybe asking about, you said you had some growers that are putting 2 fungicides on at flowering. I wonder if he's asking about the timing on those 2.
So if that's the question, that was, by the way, before we had Miravis Ace. So we were trying to get more green material, and we haven't done many of these trials, but he did one just basically when the heads, about 75 or 80% of the heads had fully emerged. So kind of what we would call a little bit too early, but close to being at the right time. And the second one was 10 days later. So he left a 10-day window in between those two fungicide
So
applications.
he might have been like, say, 5 days prior to flowering and then maybe 5 days after flowering or something like that.
He was probably more like 2 days before flowering, right? So some like he was close. He wanted to make sure he got most of the heads covered. So he waited till most of the heads had fully emerged.
Gotcha.
But as soon as that happened, he went, and then 10 days later.
And then do you recall rates? Was he doing half rate, full rate?
No, he did full rate. So you can only, in Ontario, you can only use Prosecco once and Carumba once. And so he did, if I recall correctly, he did full rate Prosecco first and full rate Carumba second. So there's some cost involved there.
Yeah.
And I'm not like, again, we haven't done a ton of research on that, but man, when you look at those leaves, he had stay green.
All right. So we will stay on and answer questions till they're all done, right, Pete?
Yeah. So if it gets to be much after 10 o'clock, I might have to, I got to go by 10:30 for sure, Dennis. I have another presentation to do. So.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, we'll try to get through them. I've been talking a fair amount, so I'll try to let you answer questions and we'll get through them.
No, I love this discussion. So let's get through as many as we can by 10:15 or something like that. Yep.
Okay. So from the chat box, let me ask the first one. Peter, can fall applied starter fertilizer damage seedling growth? And if so, is the good time, or when is the good time to apply the fertilizer?
I think we talked that one. Like, yeah.
Next one. What about broadcast wheat into standing soybeans?
Yeah. So if I have growers that are making that work. So a few things. You have to increase your seeding rate significantly. If you have heavy slug population, it's a disaster because the slugs, as the wheat germinates, there's not much left green that they like. And just as it's germinating, they will pop the germ end out of the wheat kernel. And you'll think that the wheat kernel didn't germinate. You'll walk the field and say, that seed guy sold me crappy seed. But in actual fact, it did. The slug popped the germ end out, and now you don't have a stand. But if you don't have heavy slug population and you have really late soybeans, then broadcast seeding into soybeans can work, just like broadcasting and working it in with the high-speed disc can work. It's rare that you get a perfect stand along the field borders. I think that's a slug issue. Most growers will say they have to reseed the field borders because they don't get a good stand there. And the last thing I'll say is that if you're either in a really windy area or on a heavy clay soil, now you have a plant that maybe has 3 or 4 leaves. When you combine the soybeans, that's not a big issue, but it's pretty much attached to the soil until it gets to at least the 4-leaf stage. If you combine the soybeans, it's got 3 leaves, it's got 1 root that goes into the soil. So I have my 3-leaf wheat plant sticking up there with 1 root in the soil. And when the wind starts to blow, if I only have that 1 root, then it can break. And then I have a dead plant or frost heave. Now I don't have the plant anchored in the ground. And so if you're prone to frost heave, we see a lot more frost heave, but it can work. And again, if it's the only way to get wheat in or get wheat planted timely, we have growers that are making it work.
Okay, excellent. All right, next question. What are the do's and don'ts when putting herbicide on in the spring? And can you add nitrogen and or fungicide at the same time?
Yeah, so the do's and don'ts, the do of weed control in winter wheat is kill it in the fall. Kill it in the fall, because if I have dandelions or fleabane, we have glyphosate resistant fleabane like crazy. I don't know if you guys do as well or not. I expect you do. If we have it, I'd be surprised if you don't. Or chickweed or any of those winter annuals or perennials, you can kill them in the fall. And we have products registered that I can even spray when the weed is emerged in the fall and get control. If I try to kill them in the spring, and so remember, it's when does the weed compete with the wheat crop? Well, the wheat crop's coming out of dormancy. That's when it's making the head. It doesn't make the head until it gets vernalized. So all of a sudden, fall weeds, I could care less about them in the fall. They don't hurt me to speak of. But if they're there in the spring and the wheat breaks dormancy and it's starting to make that head and there's this bushel basket dandelion there, it wipes me out. I've seen 22 bushel loss from a thin stand of dandelions in a winter wheat crop. But I can't kill it in the spring because the temperatures are wrong, right? Like the temperature is never, it's too cold at night and I can't go out there. I'll damage the wheat. And by the time I can spray it and try to kill that dandelion, the dandelion is basically resistant because it's so big. The fleabane's probably shooting to head, the shepherd's purse, like the timing kills me. And if you're talking about ragweed and lamb's quarters and pigweed, frankly, I don't even care because my wheat's up like this and those weeds are just germinating and I have such a head start. If you have a good wheat crop, those spring annuals never even show up. If you want to spray them because you're anal about weed control the way that I am, and you want to spray them, then as soon as you see those little ragweed plants there, go spray them, take them out of the wheat crop. But it's too early for the fungicide, and don't add nitrogen. Nitrogen is a separate application every stinking time. You cannot put 100 pounds of actual nitrogen and your herbicide with it and not fry the crop. And I am not into frying wheat crops. Sorry,
Okay.
a long answer, Dennis, but
yeah. No, that's okay. But we do have to keep moving because I still have 21. We just can't seem to get below 20 questions here. So,
okay. Yep.
All right. Any idea how much yield loss would occur by seeding in August and grazing in late fall?
Oh gosh, I wish Romulo was on because I asked Romulo that question. He didn't talk about you cannot be a high yield wheat grower and graze wheat. Full stop. It's my opinion. If you plant in August, and I mean, if I plant in August at New Liskard, there's not much yield loss late August because we're so far north now. We're kind of up in the top part of Michigan, right? So if it's all location related, but if you're at Lansing and you plant in August, you are going to get crucified on yield because you're going to get fall disease and grazing. If you go way back into the early 80s, we got too much fall growth once, so we thought we'd be smart and we clipped it off. Wherever we clipped it off, that wheat didn't survive the winter. If you want to do that, do it with rye. Do it with cereal rye. Don't do it with wheat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. All right, next question. For winter wheat, do you include any N at planting in your total amount of nitrogen for the year? I think we've kind of answered that one.
Yep.
Okay. Can you discuss the mechanisms influencing the number of florets per spikelet? And then where does management fit into this component of yield?
Yeah, and so that management around that is huge. You can always get trumped by Mother Nature. So if I manage, as we've talked about, with my last shot of nitrogen at Feeks 9 and that fungicide, 21 days before my wheat heads out, but Mother Nature brings in some 100-degree days. I'm going to lose spikelets. Or not spikelets. I'm going to lose kernels at each spikelet, right? I can't help that. Or if it's really cloudy, we don't even look at sunlight, and we got to get better than that. I didn't talk much about that because there just wasn't time, but if it's sunny and you've got good photosynthetic energy, that's a big thing. But Bill, I'll tell you right now, if you don't put that fungicide on and you have stripe rust, guess how much it'll impact the amount of kernels per spikelet. Like unbelievable from that standpoint. And florets per spikelet, if you're talking about head size, that's a genetic thing. It's pretty tough the forest fires in Alberta put so much smoke over Saskatchewan right at the time that the spring wheat was making the head that we actually that year made really small heads and we limited yield by the size of our head. But it's the only time in my career that I've ever seen head size limit yield.
Okay. Has anyone done a small, in case it doesn't work out, Yes, that's plot. Broadcast seeding wheat on soybean stubble and not working it in, maybe up the population. I think we did discuss that.
Yeah, this is on soybean stubble as opposed to flying it into standing soybeans. But wheat doesn't like to be left on the surface because now the growing point is exposed to those low temperatures. Like there's a lot of things that could go wrong from that perspective.
Okay. If we mix MAP with our wheat seed in a drill box, does the benefit from phosphorus fertility offset any potential loss in seeding uniformity due to settling out or imperfect blending?
Yeah, so we did that trial when we first started this, going way back into 1988, and we blended the seed and the fertilizer. We loaded it in the tender truck, and then we went for a 50-mile drive. And we could not get the fertilizer to separate out of the wheat, even with all that jiggling. So I'm not worried about it settling out. You do have to do a good job of blending, but always put phosphorus with your wheat. It will, the benefit's too strong not to. Yeah.
Okay. Next questions. What are the rotations in the UK and New Zealand, and what would be a good previous crop?
Yeah, so don't go to the UK because they have crappy rotations, man. They do a wheat canola or rapeseed rotation. That's the standard. And they know the second wheat yields 10% less, and they keep doing it. It's like, are you insane? But that's just the standard rotation. And I should be careful. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but it is just the common rotation. The world record wheat that was grown, if I recall correctly, after a seed crop of grass, but often it's after a legume. Here in Michigan, in Ontario, rotation matters.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because Dale Cowan yesterday talked about the yen and the record. The guy that got the highest wheat yield grew wheat after processing peas. And I consistently see that to be the best. Wheat after canola is hard to beat. And it's interesting, and we don't have time to get into why, because I haven't totally figured it out. But yeah, I think there's lots of stuff from that perspective. But rotation matters, and it's better after dry beans than it is after soybeans.
Yep. All right, next question. You don't have issues with lodging at 150 pounds of N, and that's a question. We had issues last year with some wheat lodging at 110 pounds. 110 pounds of nitrogen, even on a short variety.
Yeah, and so R40, you can make R40 lodge, absolutely. And did you split your nitrogen, Bob? If you're getting wheat lodging at 110, that tells me that you're on highly productive soil, good organic matter. And remember that the top yield grower in that yen of Ontario's was down at 120 pounds of nitrogen. He wasn't up at 180. So this supplying capability of the soil, like I make general recommendations and I'm doing it on averages. And so here's the scenario. If you put your head in the oven and your feet in the freezer, on average, you're comfortable. You're not comfortable at all, for crying out loud, but on average, you're comfortable. So when I make those recommendations or I put those numbers out, every grower listening has to put it into their own scenario. And Bob, give a growth regulator a try on R40 and split your nitrogen and see, but I don't want wheat to lodge.
Yeah. All right, next question. Do you find yield loss on a late application of N through wheel tracks with fungicide or with application towards or at flag leaf, much like tracks from P3 fungicide application?
Oh yeah, so come on, Dan. You know that we're going to use the same unit all year long. And I like tram lines better than I like tramp lines. But if you're going through with 100-foot boom, then everything has to be 100 feet wide. If you're 120 feet, so we've made those tracks to begin with. We use the same tracks all the time. Dennis, I can send you the sheet. We have a sheet about how many acres per 100 acres you tramp. if with different units, different widths of application and tire sizes and all those things. But yeah, you'll find yield loss. You tramp grain or you tramp wheat as soon as that growing point comes above ground, right? You hit Feeks 5 and you drive over that wheat and you're causing yield loss, full stop.
And I only know of one grower in Michigan that's actually using tram lines, but you go to Europe and everybody uses tram lines over there.
Yeah, it's more common in Ontario than it is in Michigan. I've got a few guys there better than you have, Dennis, but I know you're catching me.
We got a little ways to go. Okay, next question. With your aggressive nitrogen program, what sulfur source are you recommending besides the fall map? And when are you adding the sulfur?
Yeah, and so as I said, the first application, my growers are out there now, and they're using ammonium sulfate. So that's 20, and if they go to 100 pounds, that's 24 pounds of sulfate sulfur, and that should be all we need. And so then it's 28% nitrogen for the second application, and then it's either 28% applied carefully, or it's amidus or even urea, something at the third application. I have lots of growers that use ammonium thiosulfate, and typically will use at least 7 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate. I have growers that will go to 10 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate. It gets pretty pricey, but both sources work. Just remember that the thiosulfate, you don't get 100% utilization out of that sulfur.
Okay. Next question. What does the term Feeks mean?
That must be an Ontario listener. See, I changed all my Zadex scale to Feeks because I'm presenting in Michigan, and you guys haven't yet figured out that Zadex is such a better scale. And so some smart aleck from Ontario has probably thrown that in there.
You don't have any hecklers in the crowd, do you?
Oh, not a chance.
What about broadcasting wheat into standing soybeans? We kind of covered that. Yep. Nothing more to add?
Nope.
Okay. Would there be any benefit to spreading ESN instead of late 28% after you green up 28%?
You know, Ron, the problem with ESN is it's polycoated urea, and it's moisture and temperature that breaks down the polycoating. And we never know when we're going to get the right amount of temperature and moisture. We will sometime in the season. It works on corn because we got a big window on corn. But with wheat, if it stays cool and dry, that ESN may not become available till June the 20th. Well, man, by June the 20th, it's way too late for my wheat crop. Yeah. And so it's a good product. It doesn't work consistently enough on winter wheat.
Okay. Is balanced soil fertility and attention to micronutrients in the soil and in the plant more important than pushing high N?
So you can push all the nitrogen you want. If you're manganese deficient, it won't matter, right? Like so if you have deficiency, 100% you got to deal with that deficiency. If you want to drive yield and you have your micronutrients, as most growers, very like micronutrient deficiencies are small, or I shouldn't say small, they're rare. And if you don't have a deficiency, the gain from applying that micronutrient generally is small, whereas the gain from added nitrogen can be quite a bit bigger. But yeah, if you're deficient on manganese, or we're looking at boron right now, and I'm not sure we're going to see anything, but there's a few places where we think we might have seen something. So you got to pay attention to everything. It's got to be a whole package for sure.
And we're going to talk about this a little bit more next week too, about the Yield Enhancement Network for the Great Lakes region. We are going to collect some tissue samples so we can start benchmarking and identifying what was our tissue test levels for all these micronutrients at, I was going to say Feeks 3, which is what, the Zadex 30?
4 is 30, so it's probably like 25 or something like that, or 23.
I can't keep them straight between the two, but anyway.
Yeah.
So we're going to collect tissue samples at 2 growth stages, and then on all these farms that are participating. And over time, we're going to be able to build this database to really know, okay, so do we think there's some micronutrient deficiencies out there? And then we will start putting in some trials to figure out how to correct those. Okay, next question. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and it is somewhat typical for us to apply liquid nitrogen products such as Chloron or Nitamin at the flag leaf with a fungicide and not see any tissue damage. This is typically on the dark northern spring wheat.
Yeah, and so we could do the same thing here because products like Coron or Nitamin, and there's some others, SRN from Alpine or sorry, what are they called in the US? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like those products don't burn very much, and so you can do the two together. But remember, we're adding very, very small amounts of nitrogen. And if you want to have an impact, we really got to get to probably at least 30 pounds of nitrogen to get there. And we can't, well, you can't economically do that with a Coron or a Nitamin. But yeah, they don't burn. So you're right, Glenn.
Yeah, and I use Coron. I didn't use the Nitamin, but I do have data on Coron in Michigan also, and found the same thing. The scorch levels were very, very low. So it was pretty safe. And we did like the black label
Zinc or whatever.
Zinc is another one that we put on. And you're right, it has such a small amount of nitrogen on, it's almost not enough to really get the nitrogen you need. And then if you try to do it, which we did, we put 45 gallons the acre of that stuff on, and it kind of coated the leaves in this like kind of black sticky substance. I thought we were going to kill it, but it actually yielded quite well, but it was nowhere near cost effective.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, hey, we're coming along here. We only got 7 questions left.
Yeehaw, giving her.
Yeah. Is there a way to solubilize P near the seed in a high soil test situation rather than add P in the furrow, i.e. phosphorus solubilizing bacteria applied on the seed?
So Gord, I think the answer is yes. The challenge is the cost of the product versus the amount of activity that it has. And so in a high soil test situation, the P, there's enough P soluble most of the time anyway, and the cost of that P solubilizing bacteria and the amount that it takes to get enough more phosphorus available to get a yield response, it typically doesn't work. Give it a try though, because there's lots of those products out there. Do the trial on your own farm. Shane and I, my technician, we're always looking for that silver bullet. If you find it, let us know, because they do work. They just don't generally have enough impact for the cost.
Next question. Any experience with boot type seeders like an Atchison grass drill?
So I've certainly boot types. We did some work with the cross slot drill as well. We've looked at different ones. At the end of the day, you just got to find a system that gives you that uniform depth. And we've been working with a Maximers corn planter since 1972. Dennis, your trials with the Monosum corn planter, you know, it's renowned for its accuracy of seeding depth. I think the problem with most boots, if I understand what Clyde's asking, most boot types do a lot of soil disturbance, like a hoe style. If you're talking about a boot style, like a John Deere drill with the boot right beside the single disc opener, then that doesn't do nearly as much soil disturbance. I'm not big on a lot of soil disturbance, but yeah, if you have data, send it to us, Clyde.
Sounds good. All right, next question. Now, what fertilizer do you put on in the spring if putting on 100 pounds of MAP in the fall?
Nitrogen and sulfur. We don't put phosphorus on in the spring. We're playing with potash again. Joanna Fallings, the cereal specialist here, it has a project with chloride because we're seeing more physiological fleck. We think it might be a chloride deficiency, but typically it's nitrogen and sulfur in the spring. That's all.
We have been noticing there may be a potash response or a potassium response. That's something that we may need to start looking into and doing some research on as well here. I had a couple trials where I noticed a yield response to adding additional potash. So jury's still out. I don't have answers yet, but we do need to at least look at that again.
Yeah, my sense is that's likely a chloride response more than the potash response, Dennis, but I don't know. And without doing the trials, interesting. Cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Next question. Comment on blended phosphorus wheat and an air cart.
Yeah. So David, that as long as you can get the product to give you uniformity, and most, like, you get to such a volume going through those air carts sometimes that they have trouble dealing with that level of volume. I know some of the older John Deere air carts simply couldn't handle it. The new ones can. So you just, if it'll handle it, I think that's okay. But you need to make sure that you're getting uniformity in the trench, that we're not getting bunched up wheat seed and fertilizer because it's chucking out, so to speak, and that you can do the quantity. Yeah.
Okay. Are you aware of any awnless wheat, awnless soft white spring wheat varieties?
Glenn, I don't keep up on spring wheat soft white spring wheat varieties well enough. We could soon find out. You just go to Washington State. If anybody has them, Washington State will.
Yeah, we looked into some spring wheats last year because there was part of Michigan that didn't get all their wheat planted, and so we had guys looking for straw in particular, and a place to spread manure. So, but I can't remember which varieties were awnless or not. We did look into several varieties, but I could go back and look in that if you want to contact me. All right, best timing for split nitrogen with a streamer bar, Feeks 5 or 6?
So I think it depends a bit on how much nitrogen you put on in your first shot and the status of your wheat crop. You don't ever want to starve the wheat crop. So if you've got a decent shot up front and your split is you're only doing the 2 splits, the one shot up front and the second split, then I would say Feeks 6. I like to hold it back that little bit longer and try to have a little bit more available at anthesis, plus a little bit less lodging potential. So I would push to Feeks 6 in that scenario. But again, if you're starving it for nitrogen, then Feeks 5 would be better.
Yep. And the amount of rainfall you get in between your first and your second application may help dictate that too. So pay attention to your local weather station.
Yeah, 100%. Or your local rain gauge.
Yeah. Okay, comment from Ned. Remember that farmers in the Lake Erie watershed, we have to be careful about excess fertility and algae bloom and the chance of facing increased legislation or regulations. And Ned, thanks for that comment, because that is really real. And Peter, you said that, somebody asked you about the rotation with corn silage, and we have to pay attention to that because in Ohio, they have some regulations that they have to follow that we do not have to follow yet.
Yeah, and so Ontario's part of that problem as well. We all drain into that western Lake Erie basin, and so if you are at anything above a medium, basically, if you're anything above a medium or a medium high for a phosphorus soil test, then you have to look at your removal, and you cannot apply as much as you remove. You have to start pulling that down because we know that once that soil gets saturated with phosphorus, soil can actually take phosphorus out of water like crazy. It's like a charcoal filter. But if the charcoal filter is saturated, then all of a sudden our tiles are putting phosphorus into Lake Erie. We can't do that. So 100%, Ned, 100%. Yeah.
Yep. And then next question, what about split PGR versus one-time full rate?
Yeah. So I think that if you time that one-time full rate, that it does a fine job. If you're really into it and you want to start splitting, that's okay. But that record wheat of Eric Watson's, he did 2 applications of fungicide of growth regulator. And part of the Guinness rules are that you cannot go off label. So he could not put on half rate twice. And so he actually had to use both manipulator for us, so the Psychocell product, and Palisade for you, Modus for us. And he used them both at full rate once because that's all he could do. And he got world record wheat. So for us, do we have enough lodging potential that we need to go to a split on the PGR? I sort of doubt it. I think if you can time it well, one full rate is going to do the job.
The only other comment I'd add to that, I did have a trial where I did split, and I think we went, I got to go back and look, it was either 4-ounce rate or 6-ounce rate. And we did the split on the timing. So we put 2 applications of Palisade on. and man, did it shorten the wheat, but it dinged us on yield too. So
Yeah.
I don't know that I would recommend that at all. Do the single application, and I mean, depending on your situation, maybe even back your rate off a little bit. You know, unless you have like severe potential for really bad lodging.
Yep.
All right, two more questions. Any problems with wheat following forage triticale in rotation?
So yeah, triticale is half wheat. And so triticale is going to harbor things like take all and those root diseases. I mean, if you've never had a problem with that, you won't see it in the first year. It takes time for those diseases to build up. But if you walk into a situation where it's been wheat every other year and then you put in forage triticale, you could see a big problem quickly. So there could be a problem. But most growers that do forage triticale have alfalfa in the rotation. They got big, long rotations, and they do it with no problem at all.
Yep. All right, and then the last question, how to control rust disease?
So either grow a resistant variety or any of our fungicides do an excellent job on rust. I can't think of one fungicide that doesn't do it. The trick with rust is be there immediately. You see one pustule, or Dennis puts out that stripe rust has been found in Michigan, and you have a stripe rust susceptible variety, you just go spray. Because one thing about rust diseases, they move incredibly quickly. So you just can't sit on your laurels.
All right. That is the last question, Peter. You've done a wonderful job today. And I thank you for being willing to speak to our group here.
I appreciate the opportunity as always, Dennis. I love speaking to Michigan growers. And I love the fact that you guys are getting on board with pushing high wheat yields. That's just fun. And so now it's going to be a competition, Michigan and Ontario, see who can be best.
Yep. And more on that next week. So stay tuned.